Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Pat Clawson. Pat is the chairman and CEO at Resurface, a business that offers a simple method for enhancing API security. It's built to facilitate data interchange between channels, teams, and systems, and configured to capture API traffic from all sources. And Pat has more than 20 years of practice in the software industry, and he has successfully led dozens of high-tech companies to profitability while understanding their business exposure to address risk management. Pat, thank you for joining our interview today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So, Pat, let's start. Could you tell us a short story about your career path, what brought you to where you are at now, and what you're up to these days?
Yeah, for sure. My earlier days, I came up very much in the healthcare world. So as regulations were starting to explode, as documents and voice and other forms of medical records were digitizing, so the concepts of risk were starting to, enter my world then. I got into the cybersecurity space early, so with a company called CyberGuard, who I was able to build that. It was a layer 7 firewalling company, so very much gateway, and we were able to build that and sell that company to a competitor in around 2005, 2006. I then was able to move into an endpoint security platform, which was originally called PatchLink, and we changed the name to Lumention as we became a more broad endpoint security and management platform. Built that, was able to sell that company as well. But that was about the time when I first started communicating about the role a CEO had to play and the board had to play in managing risk and cyber risks, particularly within their enterprises, because there was a bit of a disconnect. It was happening. They didn't know what it was. From there, I went on to a data end-of-life platform, which was a publicly listed British company. So we dealt with the risk of having data around too long and not eliminating it and creating, free storage space. But the last step I was at before this was a dark web monitoring platform. So it's understanding the risk to your enterprise and to your individuals about your data being too easy to seep out and find out places that it could do you harm. And today, I'm at Resurface, and Resurface is an API security platform. And just kind of digging into what Gartner says is probably the #1 attack surface this year, which are APIs. And I think they said last year, the year before, that the amount of malicious API traffic dwarfed legitimate traffic. So it's a constantly evolving educational process.
Wow, you have such a deep understanding of industry and several companies, and you managed to sell 2 of them, and you managed to grow a lot of companies. So it's kind of a magic wonder you have. So maybe we
I don't know about that.
We can concentrate today on a topic of how can we understand the business exposure to intelligently address risk management, because you have experience with many companies, and you are a builder also. You are also a specialist in a cybersecurity space. Can you explain us what is this? First of all, what is the API security, and how is it related to risk management? Is it only one vendor risk, or is it more than that?
It's what we've seen over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years is an explosion of API technologies as a communication tool. With that, it was probably even exacerbated by the shutdown around COVID, with the explosion of apps which leverage APIs for communication. The switch to 5G leverages APIs. I think it was Akamai said a couple of years ago that 83% of all web traffic now flowed through APIs, but no one was really doing much about protecting that active surface, right? It was an exposed surface. It's high volume. It's often responsible for a majority of companies' revenues, but no one was watching what was going on. If a user was authenticated and they were legitimately inside that API or microservices, no one was watching what their behavior was, like we do on a laptop, a desktop, a server, or a virtual environment. or even cloud storage locations, the API was a no man's land. So the industry started to evolve around the concept of, wait a second, that's not good. We love our APIs, but we need to make sure they're healthy and safe at the same time. And that's how this industry was born.
Mhm. So based on your experience in the different kind of branches of cybersecurity space, can you share with us how can risk managers manage their exposure to different cybersecurity threats?
You know, look, I'm the guy that says there is no one complete answer. What I do think is that there is an incredibly growing and large number of laws and regulations. On top of that, there's incredibly, increasing numbers of threats, and technology continues to evolve. So it is an iterative process. It's a never-ending process. And what I like to tell people in the risk management and compliance space is that it's your job to make this digestible to your executive team and your board. If you can't figure out how to communicate to that group of people about your overall risk posture and what you need to do to improve it, you're not likely going to be able to achieve the budget required to keep the business safe. So there's a large iterative process that never ends. It's constantly taking in feeds from changing regulations and laws, the new technology that's proliferating. I'll put an exclamation point on that. I think Larry Ponemon did a study recently, and he said that the average company shares their confidential information with something like 583 third parties today, right? That's the explosion of cloud services and third-party vendors, that are touching your sensitive data. It's exploding. So your compliance and risk teams need to constantly be understanding the changes in your risk posture and communicating that effectively to your business leaders.
Mm-hmm. Let's drill a little bit around API security. For example, major what is privacy consideration in the API security space, considering GDPR and other privacy directives? Specific knowledge or other tricks has to be learned by people working in this space.
Yeah, so all the same regulatory requirements that exist in GDPR about data residency, data privacy, exist within the API architectures and infrastructures as well. Flowing through our APIs are often our banking information, because we're using banking apps. It's healthcare information because we're using healthcare apps. It's PHI, it's PII, it's all of those data sets are flowing through our API. So one, you have a responsibility to protect that data as it's being used. And then you also have the responsibility to make sure you're not violating GDPR when you're doing it. And there's an interesting concept here. And then I think the vendors started in this space a little recklessly, because they wanted to be a third-party hosted environment like an AWS or Azure or Google, but they wanted to go to a bank in Europe and say, I'm going to secure your APIs. Well, how do you do that? I need to get access to all of your API traffic. Well, that starts flipping switches, like the data processing laws within GDPR. If I, in a third-party environment, am seeing that bank's private data flow through my platform, I'm now processing third-party data. If I were to create a database for threat hunting, I would now be controlling third-party data, which would be a violation of GDPR, Japan's PII laws, Singapore, California, you name it. So a lot of the vendors have stood themselves up in a third-party format, but you really need to think about what that means and what you're actually capable of doing legally. It's quite limited. So most of what I'm seeing today is first-party deployments in order to work with banks, healthcare institutions, and governments, protecting their API data, but within their own confines, their own boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I would like to ask you a personal point of view with regards to the API security space. What is the commonly held belief or major misconception that you are strongly or even passionately disagree with, just to understand?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you get me a little fired up, right? So, um, it's an interesting business because there are probably three big stakeholders in securing your APIs. You've got your DevOps teams that are building them. You've got your AppSec teams that are also involved. And then you have your security operations organizations, which are often tapped when something goes wrong to go fix the problem. So what we're finding is when DevOps is largely involved, they're the ones who built the APIs. They're not necessarily testing them before they put them into production. They don't know if they have code-based anomalies, slow performance, bad code. They don't know that. And if you don't have a tool to look at it beforehand or in production, you're never going to know what the problems are, which are creating, if you follow the NIST guidelines, those anomalies are future attack platforms, like a slow performing API, maybe a future DDoS attack. So what we're seeing is when we're approaching the DevOps teams, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to put it in place. It's never going to make their lives easier, which isn't necessarily true, but it looks at a short-term pain. And somewhat similar with the AppSec guys. The security teams seem to get it. They want to start monitoring. They want to understand if they've got leaks, they've got malforms, they've got redirects, but they also want to understand the totality of their API attack traffic so they can start dealing with it.
Mhm. And, so what were companies doing before solutions like yours were available?
I think they just kind of stepped into it. I think as the API security issue became bigger, they're using gateways, and gateways can do some things at point of authentication. So they have some protections that are built in there. Um, there's a certain degree WAFs could do something at the gateway as well, but they're not actually seeing what's transactionally happening within the API. So I think there was a start from a gateway perspective, but as people started to understand the totality of the problem, that's where the API security companies started to grow, because you've got to be after those products in that zone of the unknown and within the microservices.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, if we take a life of a risk manager, if there is one thing that they should start to prioritize right now that they are not doing currently, what would it be?
I think NIST calls for the first step, which is identification or discovery. I think I would work with a vendor, and several of us will do it for free, is to allow us to plug into both your north and south API traffic, which is external facing, east and west, which is internal, and summarize exactly what the totality of your API traffic is and what the outcomes are. How much of it is successful? Do I have malforms? And can I dig into that, direct that back to a platform like Jira so development can work on that, right? Do I have leaks so I can get development to repair that? Do I have attacks so that I can route that to the appropriate platforms for remediation, right? It's the first step, though, is really defined as identification by NIST, and I think we call it globally discovery. It's understanding the totality of your API traffic and its outcomes so that you can act, put a budget around it, and then act.
Mm-hmm. So, where do you think that your industry is, as a whole is heading? What are the trends in the space, and what should we expect from you guys in the future?
Yeah, I think this space, there's a pretty big magnifying glass on the space right now. I think people are today preparing for API security as a part of their budgets in 23, 24, and 25. So I think you start to see this business, the API security, take hold. And then, my view is that it's a feature of a larger platform down the road. I don't think API security is a standalone technology. I think it becomes a part of a much bigger platform where vendors are taking care of customers at laptop, desktop, server, gateway, you name it, right? So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you see the space get consolidated.
Mm-hmm. So, based on your rich experience as a business owner or CEO, I would like to ask you, what is your approach to innovation that you are able to build? You've been able to build such several companies, successful companies in the space.
So I have my own little method, and whether it's right or wrong, but I use it pretty aggressively. So before getting into a sector, I try to do four things. One is I try to dig into industry analysts that are familiar with the space, whether they're the Gartners, the Forresters, the 451 groups, or you pick it. There's a variety that get involved in different sectors. I then reach out and talk to some financial analysts that I know that have been covered my companies previously, that are at the mid-tier firms that get cybersecurity and where it's going. I then do a competitive research piece. I want to know everybody who thinks they're in that space. I want to know who they think the right verticals are, the ideal customer profiles, their pricing methodologies, their competitive advantages, and then I try to do a survey beforehand. But it helps me understand the space and where the opportunities to grow, the addressable market, all of that fun stuff. And then if I make a commitment into a space like API security, the first thing I like to do is bring on a group of advisors from around the world, CISOs and chief technology officers, chief information officers that own cybersecurity and are passionate about helping new technologies form. And that helps you understand. I have an advisory board coming up in November, and we're getting feedback from all the advisors from around the world today. And it's fabulous listening to their ideas about what they would like to see, what should come next, where they think the strengths in the industry are, where they think things are just broken, right? So it's keeping fresh with industry leading thinkers to help drive you forward.
Fantastic. So maybe without the name, dropping the names, maybe you can explain us what something you or your team have recently achieved that you are really proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a couple things on the back end that I'm really proud of how we handle it. I think the first is we discover APIs. We alert on any types of attacks, anomalies, or OWASP violations. But it's what do you do with that? It's the so what that I'm proud of how we handle. So we've created this intelligent alerting process that says, look, the administrator at Bank ABC in Belgium can't deal with 1,000 emails a day for things that are going on within their APIs. So we alert them once per day per attack type. But within that alert in Slack and Teams and GChat, whatever it is, they have all the context around what's going on. Well, it's happened 3,000 times today. It started at noon. This is what's going on. But behind the scenes, we've created integrations to third-party platforms. So if I have a particular type of an attack that might be taking place, right? I know that I've already set up a remediation path for that particular type of an attack. I'll give you a working file attack. I know that I've already set up for that attack type an integration to a third-party platform with all the dimensionality about that attack behind it, so they can begin a remediation process. So we're automating that remediation loop, and we're not waiting for somebody else to do it for us.
All right, fantastic. So if we summarize it, if someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would it be?
I think at a high level risk is guys get good at it. Guys and gals get good at it. Learn how to communicate up and down within the organization. It is never ending. And it is next year's risk issues will be different than this year's risk issues. So it's a great industry and it's a great space, but embrace it and learn how to communicate up. I think that's a huge deal. As a CEO, I've had people that aren't terribly good at communicating up. Relative to the API security landscape, folks, it's not going away. Find vendors like ourselves that will allow you to analyze your traffic, tell you just how good and bad it is, and you can do that stuff for free. So that you can say, I will prioritize this in my budget for these reasons, but you're doing it intelligently.
All right. So I ask this question all of my guests because I'm running global risk community and we're a community of risk managers. So how we at the global risk community can contribute to better understanding this complex world of risk from your perspective?
The complex world of risk or the complex world of the new API security?
No, it's for us, not for you, for me to take tip from you how we can manage better a global risk community.
Yeah, that's a great question. And your team, your folks, the people, your 100,000 listeners around the world will probably poo-poo everything I say because I'm just a guy. But it's really owning your industry, understanding that risk management process, constantly be reviewing your critical action steps, and understand what your organization is capable of doing and not capable of doing, assess, prioritize, and communicate. I think one of the things that I've seen historically as a CEO is the inability of the risk or compliance team to communicate with evidence our risk and why we need to address it, and then help us figure out how to do it.
All right, fantastic. Pat, these were all my questions. If I forgot to ask you something, maybe you can do something if it would benefit of our audience. If you have something that I didn't ask you.
No, I really don't. I appreciate your time. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to your audience, and I look forward to many more years of this.
All right, thank you very much, and I wish you a great success with your fifth or sixth company, right? So I wish a great success for Resurface, and maybe in a few months we can continue on another topic, just to understand another angle of this new important technical issue or technical aspect of cybersecurity.
Absolutely, and I look forward to it.
Thank you. Bye bye. Stop.